Good afternoon, class. My name is Vanessa Soul, and today I'll be talking to you about child sexual abuse and neuroscience. First things first, what's child sexual abuse? When defining child sexual abuse, you have to be sure that you are not excluding anything that can fall under those terms, which the CDC is very careful of, and that is why I have chosen to go with their definition of child sexual abuse. The CDC defines child sexual abuse as any completed or attempted sexual act, contact, or exploitation of a child by a caregiver. If you move over to the right of the screen, you will see that the CDC provides specific definitions for each of the boldface terms, which are used to distinguish sexual acts of those involving penetration, abusive sexual contact as intentional touching with no penetration, non-contact sexual abuse such as exposing a child to sexual activity, taking sexual photographs or videos of a child, sexual harassment, prostitution, or even trafficking. When exploring who, I was reminded that there are many cases of child sexual abuse, many that go unheard of, some that are found to be unsubstantiated, some where children have told somebody and that person either didn't believe them or did not know where to go from there. So when looking at statistics, you have to remember that this is just a portion of the truth. But for today's purposes, I found some statistics for us on a site called d2l.org. D2L stands for Darkness to Light. This is a group of people whose sole purpose and goal is to put an end to child sexual abuse. They found that 400,000 children are sexually abused each year. That means 1 in 10 children will experience child sexual abuse. 90% of the victims are abused by someone that they know and trust. 60% are acquaintances like teachers, community leaders, or even your neighbor. 30% are immediate or extended family. Only 10% are strangers to the child. A reactive approach does not work. Only 31% of children tell someone within the first year of it occurring. Only 55% of reported incidents are investigated by CPS. Only 29% of reported incidents lead to police arrests. When trying to look at the diversity included in CSA, I found that before boys turn 18, 1 in 6 have experienced some form of sexual abuse. For girls, it is a 1 in 4 ratio. If you look to the right, I provided a chart that I found done by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in 2008. And it is representative of all 50 states. And it is on child maltreatment, but it has emphasis on sexual abuse. There are 3 top tiering races in this chart. Number 1 being white, number 2 being African American, and the third one is Hispanic. This lets you know that it does not matter the color. Anybody can be a victim of this senseless crime. When looking at the biological effects, it can become an extensive process. Extensive research can be done with it. But today we're going to focus on a few ideas. One of them being that there is a decrease in volume of gray matter. Now, gray matter is used for muscle control, sensory perception, and things like hearing, seeing, memory, and serotonin. Then you have a decrease in the frontal lobe that can occur with this. And the frontal lobe is used for higher mental processes like thinking, decision making, and self-control. Then you have the hippocampus. There can be a decrease in the size of that. This is used for forming, organizing, and storing memories. Then you can have a decrease in the corpus callosum. This is used to integrate motor, sensory, and cognitive performances between the cerebral cortex of one side of the brain to the same region of the other side of the brain. Then you have the limbic system. And the limbic system is responsible for emotional life. And there can be an increase in that when it comes to CSA. There are three major neurobiological stress response systems that are involved with this. Those being the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight, the limbic, hypothalamic, pituitary adrenal axis, which is the central stress response system, and then you have the serotonin system, which is used for the regulation of things like appetite, sleep, memory, learning, temperature regulation, mood, behavior, and cardiovascular functioning. The psychological impact that this can have on children is grand. Child survivors of sexual abuse are at increased risk for anxiety, inappropriate sexual behavior, and preoccupations. For example, if a child is, a female girl is sexually abused by a man in power, when she comes into contact with a man who has some type of authority, she may associate that man's authority with those same sexual acts that she had to do with or for the man who abused her. That right there is an example of that inappropriate sexual behavior and sexual preoccupation with the perpetrator and those alike. Other things that come into play are anger. You have guilt, shame, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of the social and environmental risks that come into play is that children who are sexually abused, this is not usually an exclusive form of abuse. It can be in conjunction with emotional, psychological, or even physical abuse. It can be in conjunction with neglect, and it can happen in families that have low support, high stress, and poverty. Another social risk or environmental risk is for children who are impulsive, emotionally needy, have mental health disorders, or even substance abuse. Then you have a risk for out of home youth. They are at risk because these children are out of home on the street, and they may engage in things of this nature just so they are able to have food, water, and shelter. Then you have children living in conflict and post-conflict environments. Some of the implications of social work training and practice when it comes to CSA is that we must stay abreast of current research, such as CSAIO, which is Child Sexual Abuse Images Online, because these can affect victims. It may be psychologically, it may be emotionally, but there is an effect, and there is a lack of research behind this and how it affects clients, meaning we need to figure out ways to help them through this type of sexual abuse, the non-contact idea of sexual abuse. We must review current assessment, treatment, and therapeutic responses to these situations. We have to advocate for all victims. We have to see a problem in all instances, not people who were just penetrated, not people who felt the physical part of the sexual abuse, but those who were forced to watch, to look at, to take pictures. They are victims as well, and it's important that we see them as themselves and advocate for them. And then we need effective training. Without effective training, you have incompetent therapists. With an incompetent therapist, you have ineffective treatment, which is not only hindering the client or the patient's progress, but it is also affecting them in a way that is making the situation worse, where it's supposed to be helping them. And then you have personalized EBI or EBT. There is no one slate treatment for this situation. You need to make sure, or we as social workers need to make sure that we are competent in the areas of EBI and make sure we find the EBI that is going to be most effective for the client that we are working with and the type of things and trauma that they have experienced themselves. When applying pharmacotransactional model to CSA, it can be when applying farmers transactional model to CSA, biologically, it means that there could be a decrease in volume or size of various brain structure components or a decrease in healthy brain functioning. Psychologically, they could become depressed, ashamed, unable to cope with stressors appropriately. Socially, they become isolated. They struggle with interpersonal relationships. Spiritually, now this is dependent upon the person and their personal values. They can either find strength in a higher power when dealing with this experience, or they can disengage from that spirituality due to what happened. Or they even may end up not seeing a purpose within themselves, thus, no purpose in the higher power. There is a challenge in living with these people. The challenge becomes with not categorizing people that they come in contact with that are similar to the perpetrator. There is a challenge with building relationships, and there is a challenge with just having freedom from that CSA experience within itself. Thank you.